The wind howled across the Wyoming plains, carrying whispers of a storm that could bury a man in snow before he'd even blink. Out here, where the nearest neighbor was a 2-hour ride and the stars were the only company most nights, Elias Boone had carved a life from solitude. His weathered hands gripped the reins of his horse, his eyes scanning the horizon for stragglers from his herd. 52 years old, with a face etched by sun and sorrow, Elias was a man who'd long accepted the quiet. But tonight, as the first flakes of a blizzard began to fall, 3 sets of headlights pierced the dusk, weaving toward his ranch like fireflies drawn to a flame. Strangers. And in these parts, strangers meant trouble or salvation. Elias had lived alone for nearly 2 decades, ever since his wife, Clara, passed in a winter not unlike this one. The ranch, once filled with her laughter and the scent of her sagebread, had become a silent monument to his grief. He'd buried himself in work, tending cattle, mending fences, and keeping the world at arm's length. The townsfolk called him the Hermit, a nickname he neither confirmed nor denied. His only visitors were the occasional drifter needing a meal or a ranch hand passing through for seasonal work. But these headlights, bouncing over the rutted path to his doorstep, carried a weight he couldn't yet name. The vehicles, an old pickup, a dented SUV, and a minivan with a cracked windshield, pulled up to his porch as the snow thickened. Elias stood at the edge of his yard, shotgun resting against his shoulder, not threatening but ready. 3 women stepped out, each cradling a child against the biting cold. Their faces were drawn, eyes wide with exhaustion and something deeper, fear, maybe, or desperation. The first, a woman with auburn hair tied in a loose braid, approached him, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. "I'm Hannah," she said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "This is Lila and Grace. We need shelter. Just for tonight. Please." Elias studied them. Hannah, maybe 30, had a fierceness in her gaze, like she'd fought battles she didn't talk about. Lila, smaller, with dark curls spilling from under a knit cap, clutched a sleeping toddler, her eyes darting nervously. Grace, the youngest, barely looked 25, her blonde hair damp from snow, held a boy no older than 4 who stared at Elias with unblinking curiosity. Single mothers, he guessed, noting the absence of rings and the weight of their solitude. Something in their faces, raw, unguarded, stirred a memory of Clara, her warmth, her stubborn hope. Against his better judgment, Elias lowered the shotgun. "Storm's coming," he said gruffly. "Get inside." The women hurried their children into the ranch house, a sprawling, weathered place with creaking floors and a fire already crackling in the hearth. Elias didn't ask questions at first, focusing instead on practicalities, blankets, hot coffee, and a pot of stew he'd made that morning. The children, Hannah's daughter, Mia, 6, Lila's son, Theo, 3, and Grace's boy, Noah, 4, huddled near the fire, their small voices filling the house with a sound Elias hadn't heard in years. It was disorienting, like a song he'd forgotten the words to. As the women warmed their hands, Hannah explained, they were friends, bound by circumstance, who'd left a small town in Colorado after a string of bad luck, abusive exes, lost jobs, and a landlord who'd evicted them with no warning. They'd been driving north, hoping for a fresh start in Montana, when the storm hit. "We didn't know where else to go," Hannah admitted, her voice cracking. "The roads are closing, and the kids," she trailed off, glancing at Mia, who was drawing pictures in the steam on a windowpane. Elias nodded, his jaw tight. He knew what it was to be rootless, to carry loss like a stone in your chest. "You'll stay till it passes," he said, not meeting their eyes. "No sense freezing out there." The first night was uneasy. The women were grateful but guarded, each carrying scars Elias could sense but not see. Hannah was the leader, her strength tempered by a quiet guilt, as if she blamed herself for their predicament. Lila was softer, her warmth masking a fragility that surfaced when Theo cried out in his sleep. Grace, the dreamer, spoke of plans for a new life, a little bakery, maybe, where Noah could grow up safe. Elias listened from the edges, offering little but his roof. Yet as the storm raged outside, sealing them in, the house began to feel alive again. The children's laughter, the clatter of dishes, the soft murmur of the women's voices, it was a rhythm Elias hadn't realized he'd missed. By the second day, the storm showed no sign of letting up. Elias taught Mia how to whittle a stick into a whistle, his calloused fingers guiding hers with a patience that surprised him. Theo followed him to the barn, wide-eyed as Elias fed the horses, asking endless questions about their names. Noah, shy at first, warmed when Elias let him hold the reins of Old Blue, his gentlest mare. The women, too, found ways to chip in. Hannah fixed a leaking pipe under the sink, her hands deft from years of making do. Lila cooked a meal from what little was in the pantry, her laughter filling the kitchen as she teased Elias about his bachelor habits. Grace, with an artist's eye, sketched the ranch in charcoal, capturing its stark beauty in a way that made Elias see it anew. But the closeness brought challenges. On the third night, tensions flared. Lila, overwhelmed, snapped at Hannah over a spilled bowl of soup, her voice breaking as she confessed her fear of failing Theo. Hannah, usually steady, admitted she was terrified of what lay ahead. No money, no plan, just hope and grit. Grace, caught between them, retreated to the porch, where Elias found her crying in the dark. "I just want Noah to have a home," she whispered. "Is that too much to ask?" Elias, who'd spent years dodging his own pain, felt something crack open inside him. He told her about Clara, how her death had hollowed him, how he'd chosen solitude because it was easier than feeling. "You're still fighting," he said. "That's more than I've done in years." The storm broke on the fifth day, leaving a world of glittering snow and clear skies. The women prepared to leave, their vehicles packed, the children bundled against the cold. But as they stood in the yard, none of them moved toward the cars. Hannah looked at Elias, her eyes searching. "You've got a lot of land here," she said carefully. "Room for, maybe a fresh start?" Lila and Grace nodded, their faces hopeful but uncertain. Elias felt the weight of the moment, the pull of his old life against something new, something terrifyingly alive. He thought of Clara, how she'd have opened the door wider than he ever could. He made a choice. "There's a bunkhouse out back," he said, his voice rough. "Needs work, but it's yours if you want it. Stay. Figure things out." The women exchanged glances, tears brimming, and the children cheered, oblivious to the gravity of the moment. It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was a beginning. Months later, the ranch was transformed. The bunkhouse, renovated with the women's help, became a home for Hannah, Lila, Grace, and their children. They worked the land alongside Elias, planting a garden, raising chickens, even starting a small bakery that drew folks from town. Elias, once a shadow, found himself laughing again, teaching the kids to ride, sharing quiet evenings with the women over coffee. The solitude he'd clung to was gone, replaced by a family he hadn't chosen but couldn't imagine losing. And so, dear viewer, as you watch this story unfold, know this: sometimes, the people who change your life arrive in a storm, carrying their own broken pieces. Elias Boone, the rancher who lived alone, found his heart again because 3 mothers dared to ask for shelter. Life, like a Wyoming blizzard, can bury you or it can lead you home. What will you do when the headlights find you? Subscribe, reflect, and maybe open your door to the unexpected.